Have you ever looked in the mirror and realized you no longer recognize the person staring back at you? I did. This morning. On our anniversary. Daniel. I'm writing this to you because the words I wish I could say out loud have been choking me for years. And now, with the city quiet outside my window and the kettle cooling beside me, I can finally breathe enough to speak even if you'll never read this. I'm wearing the crimson gown you once said made me look like someone worth introducing. Ironic, isn't it? The lace sleeves itch now, and the zipper is stubborn, but I forced it on. The mirror told me I looked almost the same as the girl you married, same dark hair falling over my shoulders, same soft curve to my smile, but her eyes are not mine anymore. It's been exactly 3 years since we stood under that wrought iron arch in Kensington Gardens, you holding my hand so tightly I thought it meant you'd never let go. I was wrong. It meant you wouldn't let me go, but you'd let pieces of me rot away in silence. Do you remember the week after the wedding? We had the guest room ready for your parents, but they never left. Your mother's perfume was sharp in the mornings, your father's cough a metronome in the evenings. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself family closeness was a gift. But soon, their whispers found their way to me. She doesn't set the table right. She's too quiet. She's not quite our type. I thought you'd defend me. Instead, you smiled and said nothing. Even then, I told myself love would fill the cracks. I was wrong again. I remember the first time you looked at me and saw not a wife, but a suspect. We'd come back from visiting my parents in Bath. Your mother was waiting in the kitchen, holding my necklace, the one Dad gave me for my 18th birthday, dangling like evidence in a trial. Prove it's yours, she said. You watched. You didn't speak. My voice shook when I called Dad and asked him to confirm the gift. When the call ended, I was still trembling. You just walked away. Daniel, that moment was the beginning of the end. But I didn't know it yet. I kept trying cooking your favorite roast on Sundays, asking about your meetings, suggesting a weekend in the Lake District. That trip, do you remember? The wind smelled of wet earth and pine. The hills rolled like an ocean caught mid-wave. For 2 days, we laughed like strangers meeting for the first time. I let myself believe that maybe, we could fix it. But the moment we returned to London, the silence crept back in. By our 2nd year, my health had begun to fray, headaches that lasted for days, dizzy spells, bleeding that kept me in bed. I fainted in the grocery store once. A stranger caught me before I hit the floor. You told me later, you need to manage your time better. Time, Daniel. Not health. Not love. Just time. I would lie in bed at night, listening to the ticking of the clock on your side table, and wonder how many ticks were left before I stopped existing altogether. You didn't notice. Or maybe you did, and didn't care. It's strange writing this, I can hear the church bells outside my flat in Bath, chiming the hour. I moved back here 8 months ago, though moved makes it sound neat and planned. It wasn't. It was a suitcase packed in 20 minutes, my father's car waiting at the curb, your eyes on your phone when I said goodbye. And yet, even now, on this anniversary, I find myself talking to you in my head. Explaining. Justifying. Hoping you'll hear something between the lines. You won't. But I'm still writing. Daniel, you've always said I romanticize the past, that I dress memories in silk so they look prettier than they really were. But here's the truth, before you, my life was not silk. It was plain cotton. Simple. A little worn at the edges. But comfortable, and mine. I was 24, working at a small publishing house in Bath, the kind where the air always smelled faintly of printer ink and tea. My desk was near the window, and on quiet afternoons I'd watch rain gather in silver lines along the glass, the world outside blurred and soft. I loved that job. The work wasn't glamorous, proofing manuscripts about gardening or history, answering emails from authors who believed their first draft was perfect, but it felt steady. Safe. Bath, in early spring, is the kind of place that fools you into thinking life will always be kind. The Georgian facades glow honey gold in the morning sun, the air carries the faint scent of wet stone and fresh bread from the bakery on Westgate Street. My weekends were for walks along the canal, where the water moved lazily, ducks trailing ripples in their wake. I didn't have much, a small rented flat above a music shop, a kettle that rattled when it boiled, but I had myself. And then came you. Or rather, came the suggestion of you. It was my aunt who brought your name to my parents. I still remember the evening she visited. The rain had followed her in, clinging to her coat, her hair smelling of damp wool and cigarette smoke. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring her tea too slowly, as if weighing each word before speaking. There's this boy in London, she began. Architect. Good family. You're kind of quiet. I laughed then, the nervous, polite laugh you give when you don't want to offend but aren't interested. But her words stuck. Good family. Quiet. I didn't think of marriage much then, but the way my mother's eyes lit up that night made me feel chosen. A week later, your first email arrived. Hello, Clara, it read. Your aunt speaks highly of you. Would you like to meet for coffee next time I'm in Bath? It was formal, almost stiff. But something about the precision of your sentences, no wasted words, no lazy punctuation, made me curious. Our first meeting was at Sally Lunn's, that tiny tea house tucked between stone buildings. I wore a blue cardigan because the day was cold, and I remember my fingers tracing the rim of my teacup while you talked about your work. You spoke of buildings like they were living things, how a roof line could change the mood of a street, how glass could make a room breathe. I liked your voice then. Low, deliberate, almost careful. We met twice more before you invited my parents to London. That visit felt like stepping into another world. Your family's townhouse in Kensington was nothing like the warm clutter of my parents' home. It was all polished wood and silent hallways, the kind of place where every sound feels like an intrusion. Your mother's smile was polite but thin, your father's handshake firm but brief. I didn't know it then, but those two gestures, a thin smile, a brief handshake, would become the summary of my relationship with them. When you proposed 6 months after that first meeting, it was in the quiet of the Serpentine Gardens. The leaves were just turning, catching the afternoon sun like they'd been dipped in gold. You didn't kneel, you simply took my hand and asked. I said yes, not because I'd dreamed of it my whole life, but because it felt inevitable. Looking back, maybe that was the first crack. Love should not feel inevitable. Daniel, our wedding day was perfect in the way staged photographs are perfect, crisp edges, curated smiles, nothing out of place. I wore the satin gown my mother insisted on, even though I'd wanted something simpler. You wore the navy suit your father had tailored, the one that fit you like it was cut from your own shadow. The weather in Kensington Gardens was merciful, warm enough for bare shoulders, with just enough breeze to carry the scent of the roses. But what I remember most is not the vows, not the champagne toast, not even the way the light caught in your hair as we danced. It's the moment we sat in the car after the reception, on our way to the townhouse. You looked out the window the whole time. I thought maybe you were tired. But the silence in that car was the same silence I'd come to know so well, the kind that hums like an appliance left on in another room, low but constant, eating at the edges of my thoughts. The first week after the wedding was full of polite arrangements. Your parents moved into the guest room just for a short while. Your mother redecorated the kitchen without asking me, new curtains, new plates, even a new teapot because she said mine looked student. I told myself this was just adjustment. I smiled when she criticized my cooking, laughed when your father joked about the country girl in the city. You never corrected them. One night, I tried to talk to you about it. You were reading in bed, your glasses low on your nose. I said, they don't seem to like me very much. You didn't look up. They're traditional, you said. They'll come around. But they didn't. By the third month, I started avoiding the kitchen in the mornings because your mother would be there, leaning against the counter with her coffee, ready to comment on my clothes or the way I folded laundry. In our house, she'd say, we do things properly. I didn't ask what properly meant, because I already knew it meant not my way. Do you remember the evening she found my necklace in the living room? The one my father gave me when I turned 18? She held it up like a stolen trinket, turning it over in her fingers. Prove it's yours, she said, her eyes sharp as pins. I thought you'd laugh at the absurdity. Instead, you stood there, watching me call my father to confirm the gift. When I hung up, you walked away without a word. That was the night I learned you could be in the same room as me and still not be on my side. Still, I tried. I learned your mother's recipes, even though I hated half of them. I kept the house quiet when you worked late. I even wore the pearl earrings she gave me for my birthday, though my ears ached from the weight. I told myself that love was compromise, that family was worth the discomfort. But it wasn't love that was growing between us. It was distance. The only time we felt close again was the trip to the Lake District, almost a year after the wedding. You'd been working long hours, I'd been swallowing my resentment in silence, and I think we both knew we needed to leave the townhouse before it swallowed us whole. We stayed in a small inn with creaky floors and thick quilts on the bed. The air smelled of pine and rain, the hills outside rolling in shades of green the first didn't know existed. We walked for hours, your hand in mine, talking about nothing and everything. For 2 days, it was like we were strangers meeting for the first time, polite, curious, eager to learn each other's shapes again. But the moment we came back to London, the spell broke. The silence returned, heavier than before, and this time it had edges. By our second anniversary, my health began to falter. Headaches that blurred my vision. Dizzy spells that left me clinging to door frames. Bleeding that kept me in bed for days. I fainted in the grocery store once. A stranger caught me before I hit the floor. When I told you, you didn't ask if I was all right. You just said, you need to manage your time better. Time, Daniel. As if that's all it was. Daniel, there's no single moment I can point to and say, this is where it ended. It was a slow erosion, small cuts, every day, until one morning I woke up and realized there was nothing left to bleed. But if I had to choose a day, I might choose the night of the dinner party. Your colleagues came over, 6 of them, all men in neatly pressed suits, talking about contracts and steel frameworks like they were discussing scripture. I'd cooked for hours. My hands still smelled of garlic and rosemary when I sat down at the table. I smiled when they asked polite questions about my work at the publishing house, even though you'd already told them I wasn't working anymore. I told myself you meant it as shorthand, not erasure. Halfway through the meal, one of them asked if we planned to have children. I glanced at you, waiting for you to deflect. But you didn't. You looked right at me and said, Clara's not ready for that kind of responsibility. The room laughed. I smiled like it was a joke. Inside, I felt something twist so hard it nearly broke my ribs. After they left, I asked you why you'd said that. You shrugged. You overreact to things. Kids are a lot of work. I stood there, holding the empty wine glasses, thinking, so am I, apparently. The weeks after that blurred into each other. My health worsened. Some days I couldn't get out of bed, other days I forced myself through the motions, pretending normality so no one, especially you, could accuse me of being dramatic. But the day I knew I couldn't stay was the day at the doctor's office. The tests had been going on for weeks, blood work, scans, endless questions about pain and fatigue. When the doctor told me I'd need a minor surgery, I felt the ground tilt. I wanted you there with me, wanted your hand in mine, even if it was just for show. When I called you at work, you sighed before I even finished my sentence. I can't take another day off, Clara. You'll be fine. It's routine. Routine. Like picking up dry cleaning. Like paying the gas bill. I hung up before you could hear me cry. That night, I sat in the bathtub until the water went cold. My skin puckered, my hair clung to my neck, and I kept staring at my knees, thinking about the woman I used to be, the one who took long walks in Bath, who laughed easily, who recognized her own reflection. I couldn't find her anywhere in that house. So I started planning. Quietly. Carefully. I sorted through my clothes, putting aside the ones your mother hated. I gathered my documents, birth certificate, bank statements, the deed to the tiny plot of land my grandmother left me. I told you I was organizing. You didn't ask what for. The morning I left, you were still asleep. I stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, watching the slow rise and fall of your chest. You looked peaceful, untouched by the storm that had been drowning me for years. I thought about waking you, about saying goodbye. But I knew it would just be another conversation where my words hit the air and fell, unheard. So I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. Daniel, the dinner party wasn't the first humiliation, but it was the one that lodged under my skin like a splinter I couldn't dig out. The next morning, I set your empty coffee cup on the counter a little too hard. You looked up from your phone. What's your problem? I wanted to tell you my problem is that you made me the punchline in my own home. Instead, I said, I don't appreciate being discussed like I'm not in the room. You laughed. It was a joke, Clara. You're so sensitive. That word sensitive was your shield. Every time I tried to talk to you about how I felt, you hid behind it. And every time, I backed down. Until that morning. I'm not sensitive, Daniel. I'm tired. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of being treated like I'm an accessory in your life instead of your wife. You looked at me for a long moment, then picked up your briefcase and left without another word. That night, you didn't come home until after midnight. You didn't smell like alcohol. You smelled like rain and the faint chemical tang of photocopier toner. You didn't explain where you'd been, and I didn't ask. A week later came the necklace incident. Your mother had been circling me all morning, picking apart the way I folded laundry. When she found my necklace under the coffee table, she dangled it like it was contraband. Prove it's yours, she said, smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached her eyes. I called my father on speakerphone. He confirmed the gift, laughing in confusion. I hung up, expecting you to say anything. But you just said, well, it was under the table. Easy to lose track of things. And you left the room. I told myself not to cry in front of her. I failed. By the time the doctor told me I needed surgery, I was so worn down I barely reacted. But you didn't come to the appointment. Didn't even offer. It's just a routine procedure, you'd said on the phone. You'll be fine. You made it sound like I was asking for some grand romantic gesture instead of the bare minimum of care. The night before the operation, I sat on the couch watching the rain streak down the living room window. You were upstairs working. I thought about telling you I was scared. I thought about asking if you'd hold my hand tomorrow. But then I remembered the last dozen times I'd asked for comfort and been met with a sigh or a shrug. So I kept quiet. And in that silence, something shifted. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't rage. It was colder than that. It was the realization that I no longer trusted you with my softest parts. That was the night I decided to leave. Daniel, the first thing I remember after leaving was the quiet. It wasn't peaceful, not at first. It was the kind of quiet that made my ears ring, the kind that left me listening for your footsteps even though I knew they wouldn't come. I stayed in a small rented flat above a bakery in Bath. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the clatter of trays at dawn, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the warm laughter of strangers below. It was a reminder that life continued relentlessly, indifferently even when yours had come apart. The first week, I cried in every room of that flat. The sofa, the shower, the kitchen floor. I'd bend over to tie my shoes and find myself sobbing into the laces. I couldn't even buy milk without feeling like I was trespassing in someone else's life. But then, slowly, other things crept in. The smell of fresh bread each morning. The bakery owner slipping me leftover croissants with a wink. The way sunlight pooled in the corner of my tiny kitchen around noon. I went back to work at the publishing house, part-time at first. My desk was the same, my mug was still in the cupboard, and the smell of ink and paper still felt like home. My colleagues didn't ask about you, at least, not directly. They just hugged me a little longer than usual, spoke a little softer. Nights were the hardest. The bed felt too big, too cold. I'd roll over expecting the warmth of another body and find nothing but empty sheets. I told myself that missing you didn't mean I'd made the wrong choice. It meant I was grieving not just you, but the life I thought we'd have. It took months before I could walk through the city without flinching at couples holding hands. Before I could see the color navy without thinking of your suit. Before I could trust the sound of my own laughter again. And yet, piece by piece, I came back to myself. I started painting again badly, messily, joyfully. I took long walks along the river, letting the wind tangle my hair. I let friends drag me to markets, to plays, to pubs where the music was too loud and the lights were too warm. I wasn't healed. Not completely. Maybe not ever. But I was no longer just surviving you. One evening, months later, I caught my reflection in a shop window. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were tired, yes. But they were hers again. Daniel, you once told me I was too much. Too emotional, too idealistic, too stubborn. You said it like it was a flaw I should sand down until I fit neatly into the shape of your life. I want you to know, I am still too much. And I am no longer ashamed of it. I never sent this letter because it's not for you, not really. It's for the version of me who stayed quiet, who measured every word, who flinched when you sighed. It's for the girl who thought love meant shrinking so the other person had room to grow. You taught me many things without meaning to. You taught me that silence can be as violent as words. That love with conditions isn't love at all. That sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away, even if it breaks them in the process. I used to think closure was something you gave me, a final conversation, an apology, a reckoning. But closure is something I built myself, brick by brick, in the months after I left. In the bakery mornings, in the late-night painting sessions, in the sound of my own voice singing along to the radio without worrying who was listening. You will always be a chapter in my story, Daniel. But you are not the whole book. If you ever think of me, and I hope you do, if only for a moment, I hope you picture me standing on the bridge in Bath, wind in my hair, eyes forward, not looking back. As Rabindranath Tagore wrote, let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. I am fearless now. Clara.